everyone. Welcome back. It is Sunshine, and you are listening to the Sober Witch Life podcast. And I did confirm we are officially on season 4. So that's kind of wild to think. I've been doing this, we're going on 4 years now. Um, so, welcome back. Today is kind of a tender topic, tender post, and it was inspired because somebody on YouTube had asked for me to kind of talk a little bit about this particular topic. And so we're just going to dive in, right? I wish that someone had told me when I was younger that my relationship with food was a lot more complex than I'd ever understood. And I'm not talking about complicated in like this, kind of trendy way where, let's go explore all of these things and peel them apart, or, something that could just be fixed by, hey, if you have better habits and you have more discipline and, if you focus on your willpower. No, like complex in the way that survival is complex, in the way that bodies learn things long before language starts to even show up for it, right? Um, you know, I'm not talking about weight in this. We're going to touch on it, but this isn't about just weight, right? This is about a relationship with food. This isn't about discipline, it's about survival. And I have found that this is so common with us witches in recovery, right? So, whether you know and are very conscious of the fact that you've struggled with disordered eating, or maybe you even just watched your addiction transfer from drugs or alcohol to food. I want to say this very, very clearly right now. There is nothing wrong with you, right? And if you've ever, spent time kind of in this like spiritual space where, you've just got to like connect to spirit and they're going to let you know, like, I agree, spirit is going to give you a lot of guidance and a lot of answers. Um, but your nervous system, especially for those of us that are in recovery, is begging for safety, right? And I want you to know that you're not alone in this, right? And so just we're going to pause for a moment and I want you to just notice your jaw, right? Mine tightens up a bit when I start talking about this stuff. And I want you to see if yours is too. And you don't need to change that. You just need to notice it. Like I just realized like I kind of start to brace. The truth is for a very long time in my life, food was the only thing that really made my body feel safe. And not always, in the way that we would hope. Um, we go all the way back to my childhood. Like, once again, this complicated relationship with food. So I want to share some of these complexities with you. My, meals for me in childhood were always very structured. We had breakfast before school, whether it was a bowl of cereal, oatmeal, toast, it didn't matter. Like, there was always some kind of breakfast, a granola bar, something before school. Lunch, we always had packed in a brown paper bag. I think maybe I had a lunchbox every now and again, but once I lost it, just returned back to brown paper bags. And we had dinner every night at the table. There was no like eating dinner in front of the TV. It was dinner at the table. And from the outside, this probably looked like stability, routine, family values. But inside my body, it was like this horrifying place of like waiting. Dinner happened after my father came home, right? And before he poured his first drink. I had a pecan stuck to my finger. Um, there was always this like heavy quiet around dinner time, and it didn't feel peaceful, right? There was this like intensity that existed there. It's almost as though everyone knew that something could tip at any moment, but nobody could really name it. But I remember one time it did. I remember the smell first. It was blood sausage, kiszka, right? I'm Polish. And it was this Oh, very distinctive smell in the air, and it made my entire stomach churn before I even could see it on the plate and before it was even served to me. And I can remember that day, my legs are, my feet are hanging over the chair, dangling. I can't touch the floor. I mean, there's some chairs I can't touch the floor right now. And I remember feeling really small, right? Like trying to almost make myself be invisible because I did not want to eat this. And I cried and I begged and I said no, but I was told that I had to eat it. What I was afraid of in that moment was not the hunger, right? It wasn't even the food, itself. I was afraid that he was going to continue to yell louder, and I was afraid that it wouldn't stop there, and that if I pushed too hard, it might turn into something physical. I don't have a lot of memories of it doing that, but I was afraid, and who knows, maybe I was even threatened with it. So my body did what bodies do when they're cornered. It froze. I don't remember much of the conversation around it, but I remember wanting all of it just to be over. I remember chewing, even though everything in me said not to, and swallowing because doing what I was told felt safer than continuing to resist, right? And so, here again, this weird relationship between food and safety. Eating it felt safer. This lesson really settled in deep, though, because it's one example of a lot of examples throughout my childhood where my body and what I desired was not trusted. What I wanted was dangerous, right? Not eating was dangerous. And listening to anything inside of myself just was not a safe place to be. And I didn't have a language for this at this time. I just knew that being still and agreeable got me through that meal, right? Years later, during some pretty intensive regression work, like as I was in recovery, though, another memory service and helped this kind of click into place a little bit more for me. I was really young. I was like maybe 2 or 3 years old, and I was a toddler, right? Like I was a toddler and I was throwing a tantrum. I was very agitated. I was angry. I was doing everything that little kids do when they are upset, when they're there's something wrong. And I received food as a response, right? A snack, something to eat, something that would quiet me, I guess, in some way, something that would, shut my mouth. And in that moment, my child brain made this really simple connection that this is how they showed that they love me. And so it took years for me to understand the weight of this. And when I came out of that regression, I didn't feel rage. I wasn't angry. I felt grief. I felt really, really, really sorrowful of this child, this young version of myself, where love and nurture were just not present. And food was what stepped in to fill the gap. Food wasn't the problem, it was the substitute. And so refusing that meal that I wanted nothing to do with was like rejecting their love. So there was a piece of me, not only did was eating it safer, there was a bit of fear, I suppose, um, that they may not show that they love me anymore. If I could speak to that version of myself now, the one that was like sitting there dangling her feet, or the one that was, given a snack instead of being held and coddled and hugged and told that everything was going to be okay, I would tell her this, that you are loved, I love you, and I want, and what you want and what you need matters, and I'm listening. If food with my father was about control, with my mother, it was all about connection. Some of like the warmest, sweetest memories that I have between her and I is we would be in the car. We would be riding around in the car and we would be talking. And this is the kind of talking that only would happen away from the house, right? It was like this release, and we would often run up to, you know, the drugstore, and we might pick up a prescription or pick up something that was needed for the house and grab a candy bar on the way out. Or we'd go run another errand, go to the post office, and we'd pull into the ice cream place. I mean, sometimes we would just go out and just go directly to the ice creamer to get, a candy bar. Um, but we'd always eat it in the car, and we always got rid of the evidence before we got home. We never wanted dad to know. And at the time, it felt really special and really intimate, like this secret just her and I shared. But looking back, I can see more clearly it was bonding, but it was trauma bonding. It was two people that were hurt and scared of the same man finding comfort in sugar and secrecy. And let's be real, while we're eating it, silence. Sweets became this nervous system regulator, probably more for her at that time than me because I often wasn't upset. We would often go out when she was upset, right? I just knew that eating something sweet together, things seemed to get calmer. And I don't blame my mom for this habit or this happening, and we've talked about it. Um, it's not the sweets that bothered me. It's the lesson that came with it. That when something is uncomfortable, you keep it to yourself. When something feels dangerous, you don't confront it. You cope quietly, right? And that lesson stayed with me a lot longer and has been more work for me to like work through than the sugar ever was. Secrecy didn't just shape my relationship with food, right? It shaped my relationship with addiction, right? Because that's not the only place that this secrecy showed up. Alcohol and its challenges or problems or anything that was never talked about in my family. My father didn't talk about it. My cousin who passed away from it, it was never discussed before, as far as how much he was drinking. I didn't talk about it. Nobody talked about any of the drinking, any of the pain that was being numbed, what it was doing to any of us. Even my father, who was told at some point that the damage he was doing to his heart was worse with drinking and he would have been better off smoking, right? He avoided like all of this secrecy. It all just stayed under the rug, just swept it under the rug. And I didn't grow up being secretive in this like very dramatic way that I think a lot of people think of from addiction. Like nobody was hiding all of this. Like, nobody was hiding all of their, dirty laundry, so to speak. They just weren't talking about it. Silence was normal, right? You handled it yourself. And if you were uncomfortable or had discomfort, you just swallowed it, swallowed it, right? Um, but after my last relapse, when I truly began to step into recovery for the first time in 2019, I knew that silence was no longer protecting me, it was killing me. Speaking became a part of my recovery, sharing things, became a part, telling my stories, naming these things, bringing them into the light, bringing these shadows into the light. Slowly and painfully, I began to see how food, the secrecy, the survival, all of it had been braided together for most of my life. We're going to go back a little bit more because by the time I reached adulthood, I believed something was wrong with my body, right? Um, and maybe I should go back and say a lot of the control around my father was around my weight. So I believe something was wrong with my body, right? Not in this like dramatic way, but in this just very constant way, the kind that like is humming, all the time, right? Um, always, and I've had a lot of conversations with people about this, right? And it doesn't matter if you're overweight or even underweight, right? Just this like my body's not good enough, right? Just kind of like this low level hum. And for me, I believe my body was unreliable, unwanted. It was too much. It was too needy. It was too reactive. It was too big in ways that felt unsafe. And so at some point in my 30s, my doctor started raising concerns about my health. And it didn't feel shocking. It felt confirming, right? Like, of course, right? Because my body is wrong. My body is too much. Um, I had blood work at that point though that was now pointing in the wrong direction. So we started to talk about what that mean. Um, and so I began to explore weight loss surgery at that time. I went through a very extensive program at the University of Michigan. Like, I think nowadays you could probably get surgery, I don't even know, in a matter of 6 weeks from a decision. But it was like a year and a half for me to actually get to the surgery date because the amount of work that they'd put in. Um, the truth in is though, is I thought I had chosen this very thoughtfully. I thought I had chosen this as a tool, but I chose all of this while I was still inside an abusive marriage. I didn't have language for what this emotional abuse was, how much it was impacting my body, but my body did. I was quietly ridiculed, chastised, judged. And I remember at some point my ex husband had told me that if I had been at my highest weight when we first started talking, right? My highest weight was probably about 340 pounds. He never would have dated me. Never would have dated me. Certainly wouldn't have married me. And he didn't say this in anger. Um, it was said casually, as if it were obvious. The message landed. His love was conditional. My body was something that I had to manage in order to be worthy of love and care. And here he was trying to control it, just like my father. So, with that surgery, I lost over 100 pounds. Well, I actively had to lose weight to get approved for surgery. So, in total, I think it was like 130 pounds. But with surgery, I'd lost 100 pounds. I got down to the smallest I had been probably since I was, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old. Yeah. And what surprised me most wasn't my reflection and the way that I looked, but it was my nervous system. I expected some peace of mind after I lost that weight, some relief, maybe some confidence. But what I felt was more exposed. The more weight that I lost, the more visible I became, the more attention I received, the more eyes began to linger on me, the more I didn't trust whether or not somebody was interested in me because of the way that I looked or because of who I was. There were comments that were made. My body, which once felt like armor, felt like an entire open wound. I was more aware of how I looked more than I'd ever been before, more vigilant, more concerned, and more afraid of being seen. It didn't matter what I weighed. The truth is, I was afraid of judgment at every size. Looking back now, I could see something I couldn't see then. And that weight had been kind of holding these cracks, this fractured self together. It had been a part of how I had stayed contained, and losing it revealed how fragile I really was. Sure, the surgery changed my body, but it didn't heal me. And stepping into recovery from alcohol changed my relationship with everything, including my body. The weight began to return. The truth is, um, by the time I stepped into recovery, I had, I believe, already put 60, 60 to 70 of that 100 pounds back on through drinking, right? And as the weight just continued to return, I would have thought that there would have been shamed, right? Especially in recovery. Now, thinking you hear all these stories like, oh, you stop drinking, all these people lose weight. So um, you would have thought I would have had shame. I'd been trained to expect it. Instead, I realized there was a lot of grief and a lot of compassion. I grieved this child that had been controlled. I'd started to recognize that that control over my body was a form of physical abuse. I grieved the teenager that hid, that never allowed herself to have a relationship, that never allowed herself to be seen, that never allowed herself to step on a stage. And I grieved the woman who believed she had to be smaller to be safe and to be loved. And I began to feel tenderness for my body that had been trying to protect me all along. I was with a different partner at that time. And this is a man, just like my partner now, that loved my body without conditions, who told me I was beautiful, who made me feel wanted and desired regardless of my size. And something in me softened. I stopped chasing the scale, and when I did, relief began to wash over me. Numbers lost their power, and my focus began to shift. I started to ask questions. Is my body inflamed? Am I in pain? Does it feel supported? Can it rest? These became more important than my weight, and it showed me that the weight coming back was not failure, it was familiarity, it was safety. My body knew how to live here. So I see my body's gaining of weight as an act of love, right? I also like to think sometimes that it's my way of my body telling me, let's do this again. And let's do it in a way that's loving and kind and compassionate and safe. Sobriety, in and of itself, stripped away a lot of the numbing, right? It stripped away all of the distraction that I had. And for the first time, I actually got to feel my body. And that was terrifying. It took years, a lot longer than I admitted. I'd like to admit, I should say. Recovery taught me how to stop asking how my body looked and start to ask how it felt, you know. Taught me to listen instead of override, to get curious instead of trying to control it. And so I just want to tell you this. If you are in early recovery, or even you're just in recovery and you're finding that you're struggling with food or weight or your body, hear this and let it land gently. Your body, my dear friends, is not betraying you. It's trying to take care of you in the way that it knows how. When we crave things, that's a communication, that's a signal, that's a sign. The habits that you have reflect the history that you've lived. None of this is random. I'm very grateful that in 2021, just about 2 years into my recovery, right around the time that all of my weight had officially returned, I met a somatic nutritionist. His name is Luis Mojica, and he is one of the most beautiful souls that I know. His work is so far from any type of diet culture. He doesn't talk about restriction. He doesn't moralize food and say this is good or bad. He talks about relationship, presence, the connection that we have with our body right here and right now. And that distinction changed everything for me. I didn't have to relive all the traumas or explain my behaviors, right? I just had to be present in them. I had to notice them. I had to support my nervous system instead of trying to fight it, right? And that was supporting my body. That was this initiation that I had of embodied witchcraft. Being sober without numbing agents and then being asked to truly inhabit my body was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And it has taken me years to get to this point. I've got over 6 years and I've been doing this work for over 4 at this time. And I want to say just now, in the past year, have I fully felt here, present. And food now is an entirely different story, right? Seeing and understanding what it does for us is just different. Looking back at the work that I've done with Louise, there's a couple of things that really stand out. One of the first is the invitation that Louise made to examine our relationship with caffeine, not to judge it, just to notice it. And then he challenged us to take a break. So I went caffeine free completely. No caffeine, no pop, no soda, no coffee, no chocolate for 45 days. That was maybe even more than 45 days. Might have been all the way up until about Christmas. And I noticed I was tired. I was slow. But I learned something about me that stopped me in my tracks at that point. I'd been living most of my life in forced stimulation. I even started to remember how in high school I would go drink 2, 3, 4, 5 cups of coffee at night at a diner, and I would stay up until dawn, right? And I remember how normal that felt for me. I remember claiming that I was a night owl for so long, right? How driven, how productive, how anxious. And I carried this tradition into my 20s and into my 30s, right? Stimulants had been propping up my nervous system that was already overwhelmed, already just so overwhelmed because of the amount of trauma that I was carrying. I'm not going to lie to you. I still do drink caffeine, but nowadays I might have a cup of regular coffee. And most of the time I'm choosing decaf, right? And I can tell pretty quickly if I'm ever slipped regular coffee instead of decaf. My body just knows. I can feel the response almost instantaneously. Learning all of this helped me to understand something pretty critical, and that is anxiety is not just emotional, it is also very physiological. Him teaching the second thing is, was all around fiber. That's the second thing that he really that has really stuck. Right? I'd always known that fiber would help with digestion. What I didn't know though is it helps move excess adrenaline out of the body. I think it's insoluble fiber is the only thing that can do that. And there are only really three places that we can get this: beans, legumes, and psyllium husk, right? So the stuff that you'd like add to your orange juice, right? Or for me, coffee. Like I said, cup of coffee every morning still. Why this matters is adrenaline is going to raise cortisol. Excess adrenaline means what? Excess cortisol. Cortisol keeps us braced. Cortisol is where that anxiety level just remains kind of like enhanced, right? And there are so many of us that are out here walking around in a constant low grade fight or flight and do not even realize it. When we have these enhanced cortisol levels, we're like in this constant trauma response, right? And so no wonder the world seems overwhelming. No wonder life just seems overwhelming sometimes. Realizing that food could help me regulate this was a relief I didn't know I even needed. It was something I could do that had zero to do with willpower or restriction, right? Add some beans into your diet, add some fiber into your diet, right? And then there were the herbs that he taught us about: chamomile, milky oats, lemon balm, right? These like really beautiful, gentle plant allies that just helped us to regulate the nervous system. And so making a cup of tea is so much better, so much more intentional and sacred than ever popping a pill, like putting a Xanax in, right? And if not tea, there are tinctures. Maybe you're not a hot tea drinker, so you can get a tincture. You can put a couple of drops in a water or in something else you enjoy drinking. Strange fact, when we talk about this, for most of my life, I chewed, gnawed my nails. I know not all of you are going to be able to see that, but I'm showing it on the YouTube. I don't do it anymore. I literally have to file these on a regular basis now. Wild, right? That's not discipline, right? I didn't say I'm going to stop chewing my nails. My nervous system finally was regulated. Wild, right? So I'm talking about this and sharing all of this because a sacred relationship with food means a conversation, right? As I said, somebody asked me to talk about this, talk about food as it relates to recovery. It means that we establish a new relationship with food and understand how it's helping us. It means listening to how food is feeding our physical body, feeding our mental body, feeding our spiritual body. It means pausing with cravings and eating without shame, enjoying it, even if I might not feel so great later, right? The enjoyment matters. Leaving the shame out matters. And as a witch, this has changed pretty much everything, right? When it comes to food, I cook with intention. I don't cook when I'm angry to make sure that it's not in there. Like, I want all of the goodness that this food can provide. I won't cook, I won't eat food that's prepared by somebody that's angry, because the food becomes a part of us. It fuels our body, it informs our nervous system, and it's literally transmuted into the 3D energy that sustains our life. It is magic in and of itself. This isn't about a discipline. I'm not talking about discipline here. I'm talking about relation with food. And like any other relationship, it requires us to listen. It requires us to have boundaries. It requires us to be curious. I want to be clear that the sacred food work I'm talking about is not medical advice. Medical advice looks at the numbers, and that still may have something to say to you. You still may need to pay attention to that. That's not for me to provide guidance and advice on. But I am talking about this sacred food work that teaches you how to listen to your body. And it is slow work. And I've got to be real honest, it's not meant to be done alone. When we choose community, healing often becomes more potent, faster, and our bodies just do not have to work as hard to be safe because they have community to help us regulate. And I know I've had this question asked before. How long does it take to feel the changes? If I step in to do this recovery work, if I step into using food with, to support my work, how long am I, because we as humans want, or instant especially us with addiction issues, we want instant gratification. And anytime I ask spirit, they remind me 3, 6, 9, 3, 6, 9. You will start to see subtle shifts at 3, 6, and 9 months. You're going to start to see deeper, more intense, bigger changes unfold in 3, 6, and 9 years. And you can kind of see that too, that 3, 6, 9 month almost every year. I just want you to remember there's no way to rush this. Your body is going to be what sets the pace. If you've been listening and this is hitting you, you're feeling it in your heart, you're feeling it in your belly, maybe even that jawline again, you're not alone. And I invite you to reflect on your own relationship with food, especially in recovery. Your relationship with your kitchen. What has food protected you from? Where do secrets still exist? And if you feel called, reply to this. Or better yet, come join us in the Recovery Coven. You can find the link in the description. We do talk about this. I'm going to figure out ways to start weaving this into some of the work that we do. But I'd love to have you. You don't have to do this alone, my dear friends. Until next time, much love from me to you.